Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of the Thunderstock Show. I'm your host, Ross Stockdale. My guest is Kyle McDowell. We're going to talk about valuable brainstorms to enhance your life, liberty and pursuit of property. Kyle is an accomplished author. He spent years and years in leadership, which is very different than management. We'll get into that. He's worked with Fortune 10 companies and their leadership departments, and cool guy. So Kyle, first question that's burning for me is, what did you want to do when you're growing up? Because it seems like it's been a winding road.
Yeah. Isn't it for us all though, Ross? Right. It is. To say it's a journey sounds like such a cliche, but it really is true. So my path has kind of been one focus, and that was kind of ascending through corporate America and leading big organizations. But it wasn't always the goal. I bounced between two goals as a child growing up, probably all the way through high school. It was my goal to play professional football. But I realized pretty early on that was probably not going to happen. But I love sports, and I love the idea of telling stories. I love the idea of being on stage or on camera. So I thought, let me do the news. I was really passionate. I'm going to date myself. I wanted to be the next Dan Rather, who was the big anchor on the CBS News for, 20 or 30 years. But then I thought, well, let me marry these two loves. I also want to kind of stay in the world of sports. So I thought, I'm going to be the next big sports center anchor. And I went to school I have a mass comm undergrad degree, and it was my plan to go into television. And then I had this rude awakening. In my senior year of my undergrad, I worked full time for a local bank. It was my first kind of foray into the corporate world. And I realized when I graduated and I started to look into on camera roles around the country, I was going to have to move most likely to a city that you or I had never heard of for pay that was well below what I was already making as a senior in college working at this bank. And, like all of us, I had obligations and bills, and I just couldn't, in spite of my love and desire to take that role on and have that be my path, I had bills to pay. So the bank that I found myself in for the next half dozen years ended up being a launching pad for a career that I was passionate about and really optimistic and wanted to do big things. So it all worked out. I don't regret any of those decisions because they put me where I am today. And I'm very grateful for my place on this planet today. And I get to meet cool guys like you.
I can really relate to the pivot from, always wanting to be a professional athlete, then having that epiphany that wasn't the going to be the end. It might have been the beginning goal, but it wasn't the end goal.
Yeah.
What moment in your journey was maybe the straw that broke the camel's back, or the moment of clarity that was like, we're not going to do professional football? What position did you play? And I'm kind of curious how the football.
Yeah. I grew up playing quarterback, which I think, looking back, has a lot to do with my kind of fascination of leadership. Team is a team is a team. It's the chess team, the bowling team, a football team, a team inside of the corporate world, or a small entrepreneur type environment. And I don't think there wasn't like a sentinel moment that said, it's time to take your attention elsewhere. It was reality. I just reached a point where I would say from like the age of 7 through high school, I got better every year. And I got to the point where I was a serviceable quarterback. I was a pretty good player, but as you know, there are levels to everything. And I met a guy, I guess maybe this was kind of a sentinel moment. I ended up playing a lot of intramural and flag football. And I met a guy there who played quarterback in high school and for a small college. And this guy, his name's Dave Jordy, turned out to be a lifelong friend of mine. He could whip it. I mean, the guy could just throw a football in ways that I don't think I had seen. And I knew that I couldn't throw that way. He ended up going to the NFL Combine as a quarterback, didn't do anything there, but it was that kind of exposure to the next level of real arm talent that said, yeah, you might be serviceable and can play at this level, but the next level, bud, you probably should look elsewhere. But then I think on the other side of that coin, what really compelled me to kind of continue this corporate America route was, I think it's a commentary of a lot of environments, and it was certainly so for me, is that in many places or many environments, you really don't have to excel to excel. In other words, the bar is really low in a lot of environments, and mediocrity is something that is kind of passively accepted. And I realized, and I think it's because I had really incredibly hardworking parents with tremendous work ethic, learned very early. Like my first role in corporate was, I had just turned 18, just doing a little more than the next person, just caring a little bit more, and maybe throwing your hand up to say, yeah, I'll try that, when other people are kind of intimidated or scared to try something because it's new or outside of their classic scope of responsibility. So I saw, to my left and right were primary breadwinners like parents. And here I was 18 years old. And it occurred to me early that just a little bit of effort might go a long way. And that kind of stuck with me throughout. And you touched on it during the introduction. Ultimately, that path led me to leading tens of thousands of employees at really massive organizations. For some context, my last 2 roles before I left to write my book, I led about 30,000 people around the globe. So it was kind of a really, from the outside in, a fantastic ride. I checked a lot of boxes for success that I established for myself. But Ross, the thing that is kind of absent from that landscape, from that view, is the level of apathy that I started to experience with each promotion, each new opportunity. I started to get really disconnected from the environments that I was tasked with creating and leading, which ultimately led me to write the book and kind of changed my existence at that point.
A couple of things I want to double tap before we go down that path. So I grew up with a father who was, all county quarterback in high school, played, was a nominee for the Big 33 and All-Star game, and
Respect.
went to Division 3 and crushed it, did a great job, and then had the itch for Division 1. And as soon as he got there, he told me, he's like, getting sacked in the SEC, wouldn't wish that on anybody, at
Can you
least his
imagine?
size. And
Yeah.
to your point, it was like the theory of constraints, right? You rise to your greatest constraint, then you have to kind of either pivot or adapt and overcome it. His constraint was just didn't want to break his neck getting sacked by a defensive end from Alabama.
Pretty good logic.
Pretty good
Yeah.
logic. But
Yeah.
up until that point, it was his one track, that was the thing, NFL. And I love hearing from you, learning the lesson without having to carry the scar, where you played football with somebody that you like, this guy's arm, it's
Yep.
there. I respect it. But if he couldn't make it, like I'm,
Keep
learning
it
that
real.
lesson, you got to keep it real. And when I pivoted from MMA, the number one thing for me wasn't necessarily losing or getting the injuries. I was still stubborn. It was going out for dinner and drinks with a teammate of mine that was so far along. He was an awesome pro. And him just like opening up about his mental health issues of like repeated concussions. And I was like, if I keep going, you're a little bit further, you're further ahead than me, you're a little older. I don't want to be the guy that, we called it drain damage instead of brain damage.
Mm-hmm.
And that lesson from him probably saved a couple of years of my life and a whole lot of, very formative. So I think for anyone listening, it's like one of the benefits of being a human is you don't have to experience every lesson firsthand. You can learn from others. And
As we should, right, Ross? As we should learn. How many concussions do you think you've had, or do you know?
a dozen, roughly.
Dude.
Too many. Yeah, it
Wow.
started early, right? It started early because football, it wasn't until probably, well after you and I played that concussion, like
Right.
CTE was a known.
Yeah.
So I remember growing up with coaches that said, "Oh, crown tackle, like lead with your head,
Yep.
like a ram." And then turns out that's illegal now in the NFL.
Yeah. Yeah.
So going back, you had mentioned that you had a philosophy, which I love, of working harder than the next guy. And you had an early disdain for things that related about apathy or going through the motions.
Mhm.
And you really had the hunger to go ahead. What was it like seeing people that were content with being content versus you who were young and hungry? How did that fuel you in the early days?
I think it fueled me in the early days because, I'm not unique in that when I entered the workforce, and I think this is true for all of us, we all want to have a big, impactful career. We all want to find fulfillment. If we're really lucky, we're even passionate about our roles. We bring a ton of optimism to the workforce. And when I saw the opportunity to kind of excel early, it fueled me. It's like, it was this self kind of fulfilling thing. It's like you put in the effort. And by the way, you're going to pay me more than what I agreed to when I first started. And you're going to give me more opportunities and responsibility. It just felt like it was this thing. It was like, okay, you put in the work, you see the outcomes, and this is how it's supposed to be. I will tell you though, that fuel turned into something less positive, in that it's probably one of the single greatest sources of my frustration inside of the workforce today. And that is this, I mentioned earlier, this acceptance of mediocrity. My mother, who was a really, really hard worker, career-oriented woman, taught me early on, if it's worth doing, it's worth doing right. And I just see it, and you and I kind of chatted about this briefly before you tap record, is, getting someone to care, and be connected and have a sense of ownership for their work is really hard to come by. And that's why I think that the emphasis on the leader, again, whatever environment you're in, is really important because you can be a boss and check a bunch of boxes, tell people what not to do, or you can take on the, the role of leader where you actually help others grow and develop, not just for the role that they're in, but for the role that they want.
Mm.
And even if that's like outside of your company, not even on your team, you think do people work less hard when they realize that you're invested in their actual growth and not just what you can do for them on this team? So I just getting those in my circle, those that I work with, either as they're a client of mine or on my own team. It's just getting people to understand just a little more effort than the person next to you or the competition down the street can have a profound exponential increase in our satisfaction, of course, but also the results that we deliver, the impact that we have. So it was fuel early in the career, and now it's become like a source of inspiration for me to continue to kind of not only maintain my level of commitment and ownership of the things that I do, but share with others the impact that you can have when you choose to find that ownership and not be a victim.
So let me ask you, you started in banking around 18 and you've had a diverse list of industries you've been with. One was with pharmaceuticals, there was some in banking. Like what was you don't need to know the names of the companies or the step by step discreetly, but what was it like to ascend the corporate ladder? Because I feel like a lot of people listening, they may have the ambition or the motivation, but they may feel stuck, as in like they don't know how to get from point A to point B. What was the story from getting from point A to point Z for you when you went through corporate? And like, were there any recurring themes of wildly different companies and industries, but success leaves clues?
Yeah, my brain is drawn to two different responses, but they're connected. The first is I took every single role throughout my career with the intention trying to understand what the very next step would be. I never once took a role thinking that I'm going to be in this role for half a dozen years. I always had kind of an agreement with myself. 2 to 3 years probably for each role would allow me to get in, understand, what it is that I'm leading, try to have an impact, but always with eyes on the next role. So I think entering every role with the understanding that this is not the be all end all, that I'm still trying to grow and do something more and more impactful and obviously make more money. I mean, let's not vilify that. I definitely tried to make as much money as I could throughout my career. So I think recognizing what each role would do to enable the next step that I kind of designed for my path, I think is kind of one of two answers. And then the second one is um, every single role that I took, regardless of industry, it occurred to me early on. So I had about 600 employees before I was 26, 27 years old. Jumped from 600 employees to a couple thousand. That jumped to like 4 or 5,000, jumped to 10, 12,000. Ultimately at one gig, 15,000. The last two were 15,000 roles, employees. Um, I remain committed then and certainly now that regardless of industry, everybody wants the same thing. We all want the same thing. I boil it down to what I call the ABCs of the employee value proposition. We all want to add value. It doesn't matter what industry I'm in. If I'm in banking or go to pharmaceutical or healthcare, I spent most of my career in healthcare, big pharma, big insurance. Everybody wants to add value. Everybody wants to be valued. So if I'm contributing in a way that adds value to this organization, I need to be recognized and be valued for that. And then the C, it's harder to come by, but it really is impactful when we can enable this for those that we lead, is when we can connect the value that they deliver to those that ultimately consume the product. And it's really hard in some environments, but I don't think there's any substitution for recognizing the impact that you've had based on the service or product that you've helped enable and deliver to those that ultimately consume it. I think it tells you that you've done good work or not. It's fulfilling in that you've added value in someone else's life. As simple as like handing them a coffee across the counter. If you're a barista, you have an opportunity to add value in someone's life. So I always stuck to this notion that I don't care what industry is. And I've gotten calls certainly throughout my career and maybe less so now. Would I entertain conversations to enter into a different industry? And I never shy away from them because at the end of the day, yeah, I'll learn the content. I'll learn the subject if it's something wildly different than what I've done historically. But at the end of the day, it's still just people. And that's where I
Mm.
drew a lot of confidence when I bounced from one industry to another.
I love how you broke those profound concepts down into an acronym of ABC, kind of easy to
Yeah.
understand. Because the amount of business books and lectures and conversations I've had that have sort of talked about those issues, maybe one here, one there, but not consolidated that in an easy to remember play. I think you're spot on with doesn't matter the industry, you're still dealing with people and solving their very human experiences. But I think the other thing you just displayed for everyone listening, Kyle, is the better you can simplify something and put it in language that the message can be received and understood and you can understand them and you're talking the same terms, that's going to take you from leading 50 people to 15,000 people.
Yeah.
Because at the same time, of course the game is different, but it's going from playing backyard football in elementary school to playing college ball. It's still ball.
It's still ball, dude. It's still the same dang sport. That's right.
So that leads me to, I'm going to pivot into another sort of acronym you have, and we're going to dance around it. For those that are watching, it's 2 letters, WE, we, large part of your book. There was a night in Kansas, I believe, Lawrence, Kansas, that you were in your hotel room and you had to make an address for a company you worked at. Can you walk me through that night?
Changed my life.
That stage, that scene of the story?
Yeah. I'd love to. Change my life, Ross. So you're talking about the story where it was nothing short of an epiphany. Now there was no shining light or ray of, there were no, there was no kind of like metaphysical component to it, but it really did. It was an epiphany that changed my life. So I was in Lawrence, Kansas. I was about 60 days into a role where I was leading at the time about 14,000 people, really, really purpose-driven work, really important work. And it's about 60 days in, I guess. And during that period, I'd learned that this organization was ripe for what I would call kind of a cultural transformation at most, at minimum, a shot in the arm. Lots of really talented people, tons of experience that my 6 or 7 direct reports had more than a dozen years of tenure in their individual roles in this company. So they had forgotten more about their roles than I even knew. But within this 60 days, I got to meet a lot of people, obviously, and learn kind of some cultural opportunities. But there was one theme that I couldn't escape, and it was this disconnection from different functional areas. So when you're leading a team of 14,000 people, there's lots of individual groups inside that 14,000, right? We have an operations team, we have an IT team, we have a reporting team, we have HR, we have all these different areas. And it occurred to me pretty early on that the leaders of each of these respective areas, they judge their success, our macro success, based on their individual teams. So one leader could have a hell of a quarter and another leader is really struggling, but they didn't see that we're not winning as a team if one of our groups is struggling and another is not. Like, that's not how a team operates. So I saw a connection opportunity there. And the night in Lawrence, Kansas that you bring up was the night before I was going to meet with the top 40 or 50 leaders of this newly inherited organization. And by the way, it's probably worth mentioning, I took that role after leaving corporate America with no idea what I wanted to do next because I was so apathetic and disconnected from the whole machine. Man, I was burned out. So I set these kind of criteria for myself that when and if I were to go back into a similar role, it would be the type of role that would allow me to be the leader that I never had. Because I had this recipe that left me so apathetic and disconnected. Like, I knew how to deliver great results, but I didn't know how to do it any other way than at all costs. So I was that guy, man. I banged my fist on the desk. I was the loud voice in the room. I had to have all the right answers because I was right. I was the smartest guy, right? Yeah. None of that's true, by the way. It's sarcasm if you can't see you and I laughing.
But at the time, it felt true.
Absolutely. Hey, you know how this works, man. The more senior you are, the funnier your jokes are.
Of course.
Right? The more people want to spend time and get FaceTime with you. Like, I get it. I've played both sides of that coin. But I knew how to do that in a way that would deliver success, but I didn't really connect with those that I was leading. This was 20 years into my career. So I took the role, and the night before I was going to meet with this big group of leaders, it was a real gut check moment. And I remember it very vividly. I was in a hotel room, a not very nice hotel room. I was wearing that day's suit still, and it was probably around midnight. And I thought, well, I got to come up with a few slides to share with this team tomorrow because you can't have a good corporate America meeting without PowerPoint. Also sarcasm. But I thought, okay, if this is your chance and this is the gut check moment that you've wanted for the last 20 years and it's now in front of you, what are you going to do? Are you going to replicate and do the same nonsense that you've done the last 20 years that made you more money than you ever expected, gave you bigger scope of responsibility than you ever dreamt of, but left you so disconnected and apathetic? Or are you going to do the brave thing and be a little different? So that night, man, Ross, about 2 hours elapsed with laptop in lap, wearing that same day's suit. I started to play scenarios throughout the previous 20 years that left me feeling less than whole, left me feeling as if I was just kind of a cog in a machine, and that I wasn't like, I was replaceable. I was dispensable. And then I was thinking through scenarios where bosses left me feeling like, not less than human. They left me feeling ways that either compromised my integrity, made me feel like I wasn't adding value, just left me feeling sour. And I thought, okay, we are not going to do those things. We are not going to do those things. And before I started creating these principles that same night, I juxtaposed those thoughts with the handful of experiences, far fewer, of scenarios where I had bosses actually give a shit. They invested time and energy in me, and they actually gave me opportunities that I probably didn't deserve at the time, but I had shown the desire to grow and do more. They trusted and believed in me. And I thought, we're going to do those things. And there was a common word between those two reactions. It was we. So I'm in that hotel room, and I thought, I can dazzle them with my fancy MBA and starch shirt and shiny shoes and say, I'm the guy that's here to lead this transition or this transformation, and kind of lean into the way that I've always led. Or I could say, hey, here's who we are. And it's got to start with the most fundamental of all things. We do the right thing. Always. We're always going to do the right thing. And then I just started from those scenarios that kind of bounced around in my head that evening. I ended up with these 10 sentences. They still do begin with the word we. I'm not wildly creative, so I had the 10 we's. So the next morning, I stepped out in front of this group of leaders, and I started the whole conversation by saying, if nothing else, I want you to hold me accountable to these 10 principles. Because if you don't hold me accountable, it's not going to work. And you have to hold me accountable, because you know what, guys, I'm going to hold you accountable as well. But it has to be a two-way street, no leadership gap. We're going to live on the same level playing field. What's good for me is good for you, and vice versa. A concept that was completely foreign to me the first 20 years. So it took some vulnerability, some kind of ego checking for me. But I'll tell you, brother, what happened over the following 2-3 years, that organization transformed in ways that, yes, it led to all-time highs in performance. There's no question. Nearly every measurable hit all-time best or were close. But more impactful to me, that told me that I was onto something, was I watched bosses transform into leaders. People that really do genuinely care about the macro that we're trying to do. They're invested in the ownership of the mission, and they want to see good things happen for themselves, and as well as those that they lead and their peers, which compelled me to kind of stick to these principles. They've changed who I am outside of work as well, compelled me to write the USA Today, Wall Street Journal best-selling book. And now, Bud, these 10 Wheeze, they don't leave my brain for very long at all, because they are the standard that I've established. They are the standards that I've established for myself in all things, not just my professional life.
So many questions. I'm going to ask the ones that come to mind first. You talk about setting a standard and being accountable to the standard. It makes me think that we don't rise to the degree of our skill or our competence. We fall to the level of our standards or habits, which I think habits are just a verb of
beautifully said.
What are some ways that, by being vulnerable in that scenario and saying, you guys hold me accountable, have you seen the bosses transform into leaders by setting the standard? And how do you, I think one of the number one things I've learned through leadership training and talking to C-suite is they just want more accountability from their team. But when the time is right to do performance reviews in the year, the boss was perfect, and the feedback is they just don't understand.
Yeah.
So that's just one glimpse of an example where I've seen it be almost like a disingenuous standard setting. But what is the verb of setting the standard? How do you live the habits, and how do people incorporate that standard so that they transform from bosses to leaders?
Brother, it is so simple. It is so simple, but it's not easy.
Right.
It's not easy. And that's, I think, true in so many aspects or elements of our life. Like losing weight, simple. It absolutely is simple. We know the math behind it, right? Take in fewer calories, burn more calories. It ain't easy. Anything worth having on this planet is usually not easily obtained. And there's two components here. First is we got to set the standard. If we're not really conspicuous and explicit about our behavioral expectations, and it's something I learned a long time ago, but took me a while to act on it, is especially in big companies, but I think it's true of almost all organizations. We do a pretty good job welcoming someone to the team and saying, here's how you do the job. Here is the nuts and bolts, the standard operating procedures, like this keystroke. Like, we're pretty good at that. And that could be a side-by-side approach. It could be, really in-depth, deep curriculum. It could be any number of ways. But where most organizations, and more importantly, most leaders, I think, stumble out of the gate is establishing behavioral expectations, how we do the work, not what, but how we do what we do, and how we hold each other accountable to these same standards, boss included. So once those standards are established, candidly, it doesn't matter if the leader doesn't live them. And the only way the leader is going to live them consistently, unapologetically, is to own when they err, is to say, man, I blew that.
Right.
Because there's a relatability that comes when the team hears the boss go, God, I screwed that up. That one's on me. And you own it openly. So setting the standard is job one. Living it is so much harder because it's easy to fall back on our business card. It's easy to say, because I said so, or trust me, or this is how it is. This is the world that you're in. This is, I say, you do.
That applies to parenting as well for everyone listening.
So true. And you know what? It's funny you say that, because I purposely stay away from that overlap because some people find it belittling. It is very similar. It is so similar. If you want someone to behave in a particular way, you cannot behave contrary to that way. It just doesn't work. And in the corporate world or the business world, it can work for a finite period of time. It can work for a very long period of time, but certainly always finite. But the impact that you're having during that time, and the development and growth that you see in others, and the fulfillment, most importantly, that comes when you recognize that you establishing the standard, living the standard, holding others to it. People say that's accountability. No, man, that's responsibility. That's ownership. And how we get people to really connect with our mission and the things that we're doing is they have to feel as if they have ownership. It can't be because I said so. Again, that'll work for a short period of time.
It's a Band-Aid. It's
a Band-Aid, and it's not a recipe for sustained success. So for me, it's absolutely essential that we establish the behavioral standards, we live them, and when I or others don't own it, we're open and candid about it. You blew it. Because one of the principles is we pick each other up. So when someone acknowledges their mistake, number 5 is we own our mistakes. We have to pick people up as well. And that's not just an obligation of a leader. That's the obligation of the peer. That's the obligation of every member of the team, someone more senior as well. But if you want ownership, man, you have to get people to connect with the work that we're doing. And you can't do that by saying, because I said so.
Yeah. I'm going to run down your Wheeze framework for those. We've talked on a couple. And I want to say before I do that I think for any argument, you need to have strong principles or premises. And I think for everyone listening, it's like if you start with a couple of these and you consistently act in accordance with them, you'll probably not have to wait a very long time to see your well-being, your life improve.
So true.
But they are, we do the right thing always. We lead by example. We say what we're going to do, then we do it. We take action. We own our mistakes. We pick each other up. We measure ourselves by outcomes, not activity, which is my favorite one. We challenge each other diplomatically. We embrace challenge. We obsess over details. So going back to that night, did you know during that laptop lap, that brainstorm you had, that with full clarity, like this is it? Or was
Absolutely
it like an imperfect first draft and we're going to go with it?
Yeah, dude, I'd be lying if I said I had any inkling that I would even be talking about the 10 Wheeze months later, especially years later. I'd be lying. It just wasn't the case. And I was so adamant on this ownership kind of path that I felt as if I emblazoned the 10 Wheeze all over every corporate office that I led, or we got t-shirts, and then it'd be an initiative. It'd just be an initiative. It wouldn't be a way of life. It wouldn't be who we are. And it'd be forced. It'd be this top-down thing that we've all been a part of. And it's easy to lead with these principles when things are going well. It's when adversity strikes and the chips are down, maybe there's new competition or you got pricing issues or whatever the scenario is, that's when your commitment and connection to your principles are really tested. And I refuse to be the hypocrite that would lean into them when it was easy and stray because I could when adversity was to strike. So I had no inkling that it would become what it's become. And I was so adamant about not prescribing them as the be all end all that I told the team, if you want to add an 11th, let's talk about it. Let's do it. If you want to live by 5 of these, that's great. But just know you should expect these 5 out of me, plus the remaining 5, and they don't change my expectation of you. And I'd be also dishonest if I said that, everyone in that room this morning pumped their fist in agreement and said, I'm on board. I would say half the room was really optimistic and excited about what, kind of the things that I was teeing up. I would say a quarter of the room was optimistic, but maybe a little skeptical. And then there was a group that was just absolute, this guy's full of shit. And it was that group that I put a lot of my focus on because I had to prove it to them. They didn't wake up that morning and say, whatever this guy says, I'm going to reject it. We're all products of our environment. They were all products of previous leaders that thought that, this can't be true. This guy's he's saying this today because it looks good on stage, but we'll see when it really gets tough if he lives it.
I want to double tap into that because we're right after the new year, and people, myself included, look at New Year's as the time to have resolutions. And I think for people that don't like New Year's resolutions or this time of year, they've almost accepted the previous standard as law. And
Mm,
I think if I had to guess what they were thinking at the time, it would be around, well, this is how we've always done it. This is the way it is. This is a fixed firm. And for everyone listening, right around the new year, yeah, behavioral changes take time and trial and error, and they take falling down and picking yourself
that's
up
right.
again and getting back and and trying. But take it from Kyle that when you buy into to resolution of the standard or the 10 Wheeze, and you commit to it, well, there's a difference between entertaining and committing. So, and in sales specifically, I love this idea that you aren't really a salesperson until you can understand and overcome objections. And they
Mm.
were probably your first people in this process to give you objections. So, how did you deal with the feedback to double down and commit and help others to commit?
It was hard. It was
Yeah.
very hard because I knew in the back of my mind that I didn't have to. And
Mm,
that's right. And that's where so many fail when they step into a position of authority and they have one or more people reporting to them. It's more about authority and about being right than finding right or doing right. It was very difficult for me because I knew I didn't have to follow these principles, but I also knew that if I were to kind of evangelize and espouse these principles, your team is watching to see if you're going to be consistent, if your actions match your words. And that's where a lot of folks really get sideways is you say one thing and do another. I can't trust my leader whose actions aren't aligned with their words. There was one person in particular, and I've told the story a number of times, and she's well aware that I tell the story, so I'm comfortable sharing again. Is a direct report of mine was really difficult. I mean, at every turn, in public settings, one-on-ones, you name it. Essentially, most things I said, she took exception to, and boy, did it frustrate me. It made me angry in ways that the old Kyle would have reacted, pretty swiftly in not a very productive way. Why? Because I could. That was just came with the title, came with the business
sure.
card. But Julia struck me in a way that reinforced my connection or at least my commitment to that hypocrisy is a 4-letter word. So if I'm going to behave one way that's contrary to what I just said, you can call me a lot of things, man, but being a hypocrite is not one that sits well with me. So, and I also had to connect with what I mentioned earlier is that some people are just prickly in general. She was a product of her environment. She'd been burned by previous bosses that had said
Mhm.
one thing and behaved another, didn't see her value, didn't promote her in ways that allowed her to be her best and grow and challenge her.
Right.
And one of my principles, and you touched on, I'll lean into two of them because I think they're really relevant to this story is number 8 is we challenge each other diplomatically. And number 9 is we embrace challenge. Well, how could I be the guy on stage saying this is who we are and this is how we live when the first time Julia is difficult with me? Now we could argue whether she was diplomatic in her challenges, but
Sure.
she was not shy of expressing her disagreement or discontent at times. I had to embrace that challenge or else I am a hypocrite and my words are different than my actions. Fast forward nearly a decade later, Julia, who it wasn't a secret, we didn't really care much for each other. She's one of my closest colleagues today. I haven't worked with her in half a dozen years. We still have one-on-ones every 6 or 8 weeks just to check in with one another. And I share that component, Ross, because if I were to add up the number of people that I have genuine connections with from the first 20 years of my career and how I've stayed in touch with them, it's less than a handful. If I do that same exercise for the last decade after I discovered these principles and they've kind of been ingrained in who I am and how I lead and kind of how I am as a human, it dwarfs that number. And Julia is at the front of that list. She helped me name my book. So I think there's a commentary in there that's like, it's so easy for us to dismiss that prickly, disgruntled employee that they're just an asshole without maybe taking a second to recognize the role that I play in kind of changing that behavior, the history that put them in this position to behave in this way. Now, I don't want to be naive, dude. There's some people that just got to go, right? And
Sure.
right, I'm not that unicorn
Right.
rainbow guy, right?
Right. Right. Right.
But when there's a genuine will to be better and you sense that they recognize the value that you can have as their leader more than just being the boss that checks the boxes for them and gives them a 2% raise every year, boy, they meet you halfway more than you'd ever expect. And that's, I think Julia is the perfect example.
Looking back on my own story, this applies managing up as well, I think, where
Absolutely.
I've had
Yeah.
I've had instances with people I've worked for that I just at the time it was an intense rejection, an intense feeling of disdain, and I just thought they were jerks,
It's the right
some of
word.
these
Yeah.
leaders. And then as I got older and I stepped away and they took the emotion out of the moment, I looked at the feedback as well-intended, poorly communicated, or
Hmm.
poorly received even on my own end. And some of that feedback is responsible for any of the moments in my career that I could be proud of. How do you, and you mentioned this a couple times, the dynamic between the being the boss or the leader and then people underneath. But for those that might feel like they love their job or their career or their role currently, they just can't get along with their boss.
Yeah.
How can they take actionable steps from these 10 principles to better communicate? Like, it's not all on the boss's shoulders. Like you said with Julia, like you have a long, great relationship with her, but something must have changed within that relationship to make it as it is today. How can somebody take a lesson from Julia and and rekindle that relationship and make it a strong one with their boss if they have, so they're the right person, they're in the right seat, and they might just be, not
Yeah.
diplomatically having that
Yeah.
challenge. How do you make a healthy challenge?
Yeah, but that is, it's probably the one question that I get more than any other. And it usually happens with someone that's read the book or I've done a little bit of work inside their company. It's like, I'm committed to these principles and I can really see the value here, but I just know that my boss isn't going to be. And I know that he or she may say they are, but behind closed doors in a one-on-one environment, it's happy talk. So it happens a lot. And I don't really have a great answer is the truth, but here's where I would kind of encourage folks to the lens through which they could see it. If you feel as if you're in a role that is allowing you to add the amount of value that you feel you're able to contribute, back to that ABCs, right? You're adding the value. If you don't sense that you're being valued the way that you should be, and that can come in any number of forms, right? It's not just money. It is the working relationship. There's a lot of characteristics that would say that I'm being valued, right? Or components. Sometimes, and I've done this personally, we have to make this decision. It's like, am I going to keep my head down and still do what I'm doing because I got these handcuffs, or maybe I'm happy with the compensation, or most importantly, and I'm not naive to this, I got bills.
Yep.
Like I have commitments.
You got a mortgage to pay.
And that's where I was, by the way, in probably years 15 to 20. It's like head down, screw the impact, screw the fulfillment. I'm able to acquire things in my personal life that I wouldn't otherwise be able to acquire, the cars and things like this. It's like I was lured by the outcomes, not the impact that I could have had. And I had to make that decision. And the decision's a tough one. Do I keep my head down and keep plugging along? Or do I maybe have to take a really tough path, and that's take a step back, maybe 2 steps, but to take 3 or 4 forward, to find the environment that's going to allow me to add the value I know I'm capable of and be valued just as well. That's a tough equation. That's a tough ask for some people. And for those that elect to keep their head down and still just kind of trudge along, I got nothing but love for you because I understand. But if you are bold enough to take the step back and say, there's more for me, I have an opportunity to do more, whether that's start my own thing, start a side hustle, find a completely different organization to throw my hat into the ring for a position there. The spirit of my advice here is not to settle. And the only way you can overcome this innate desire in us to just settle is a lot of self-reflection. The really corny thing that I like to throw out is, if my 9-year-old self were to watch me go through my day every single day, are they going to be proud of me? And am I living and leading in a way that I've kind of checked the boxes of things that I think I should be able to do or accomplish on this planet? And if you're not, that self-reflection is usually going to drive you in a direction that's going to be uncomfortable, but also could yield a different outcome for you.
Look,
that's what it was for me.
We're on the same wavelength because I love I call it the grandfather paradox question, where right now, most of us are somewhere in between the beginning of our life and the end of our life. We don't know when it'll end, but we're pretty familiar with looking back where it started. And a lot of us remember how we were as children. And the principle of this grandfather paradox question is, let's just say, for everyone listening, average age 45. Let's say we're halfway there. If you could go back to yourself at 8 and have a conversation, what would you say to them?
Yeah.
And then if you go to yourself at 80, what would you say to them? And I've had I think role models and like seeing what good looks like and seeing somebody that held the standard is a great way to learn and really transformative. And I've had some in my life that conversations with my 80-year-old grandfather years ago in my career of just not knowing what to do and remembering those answers. And I'm like, all right, I'm going to pretend I'm like him. Right. So if you're putting yourself where you're at in the middle and you could have that conversation with your 8 and your 80-year-old self, like walk me through the conversation and that grandfather pair, if you will.
So for me, it was the level of apathy that I had started to feel for so long. I mean, years, where I just loathed the very environments that I had built, or at least had a huge hand in establishing that. Um, I had some physical wake up calls as well. I was at the doorstep of a divorce that ultimately happened. My health was nowhere near where it needed to be. I'm a much healthier and happier person now. But it was the self reflection and this kind of inner dialogue that forced me to ask a lot of questions. And that's no different than most. But where I think I started to pivot into a healthier, more healthy path is answering those questions. Like we ask ourselves a lot of questions, but if the answer is ugly or awkward or uncomfortable or requires more work, sometimes the answer is not found as easily. I just knew that if I wanted to find more fulfillment than I was feeling those last several years, I had to change something. I had to do something different. And for me, it was recognizing that the next organization I was going to join, it had to check a few boxes for me, and that I would be able to lead in a way I never led. And if I failed, I failed. But I had this suspicion that I might have greater fulfillment and better results. And turned out that was the case. But I guess all of this is under the umbrella of, life puts us on this hamster wheel, and we end up running so hard and so fast for so long. Outside of sleep, work is the number one thing you will do on this planet, to the tune of anywhere from 90 to 100,000 hours of your lifetime. And boy, what a shame to have spent 100,000 hours of your life doing something that you loathe, or that you can't find some sort of value bigger than yourself. By the way, I don't want to come across naive. I'm sure there are members of your audience that hear that and say, yeah, but I'm doing this or I'm doing that. And I just reject that, because regardless of how senior or junior you are, where you are in your path, the role that you're in, you have an opportunity to brighten someone's day or add value in ways that you may not even recognize yet. Again, from the barista handing the coffee over and say, hey man, Happy New Year. I hope this is a jolt of energy you need. Like whatever it is, you have an opportunity, whether it's an internal client or someone external to your company, there's a chance to add value. And if we stay on that hamster wheel, we lose sight of those opportunities. We check a bunch of other boxes, and you wake up one morning, similar to what my mother did. My mother died from cancer at the age of 63. When she was 62, she was diagnosed. And I'll never forget, bro, there was a conversation inside of her hospital room. She was probably at the time, maybe months away from passing. We didn't know it was that dire, but it ultimately became the ultimate. And she had her laptop in her lap, connected to all these tubes and stuff. And I walked in the hospital room, and she had this look of despair in her face, different than usual, and was like, it's not supposed to be like this. I said, what are you talking about, Mom? She said, I've worked my whole life, and I'm not going to be able to experience the benefits of all that work. It's not supposed to be this way. I was early 30s at the time, and that one conversation changed my life in ways that I didn't appreciate or understand at that time, but it stuck with me so much so that if I'm in the middle of doing something that sucks, but it's not for a greater purpose or something that's going to give me an opportunity to open a door to a greater purpose, then I try to get away from it. And it's not always doable, right? Life is not always rainbows and unicorns. We have to do things that, we don't find pleasure in, but that's part of the human experience. And you said something a second ago, Ross, that I want to circle back to, and you talked about the value of mentors and learning from others. And I could not be more on board with you. The other side of that coin is keeping people in our circle that don't put us in places to be better. They don't inspire us. They don't tell us, that behavior you showed last week, that's garbage, Kyle. You're better than that. Right. So I think finding people on both sides of that coin, our circle, especially as we get older, man, I turned 50 a few months ago, having the right circle to continue to inspire and challenge me, regardless of what else is going in my life, what I think I've accumulated or whatever status I think I've achieved, someone to say, dude, you got a lot more work to do. I think that's really valuable.
Yeah, I have two quick stories based off of what you just said. And number one, shout out to my lifelong friend and colleague, very similar to the Julia instance you guys talked about, where, my buddy Caleb, he had called me one night and he had said, thank you. I love you. I'm having my second son, and I just got a job, my dream job, that my wife doesn't have to worry about bills. And this wouldn't have happened if you hadn't get the opportunity. So thank you. And it was great. And then we had talked a month or two later, and he goes, you really need to stop working so much. And I was like, screw you, like buzz off. You don't know me. Like I'm built for this. I'm blah, 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 blah. And I rejected it. And now I got the chance to reflect. I'm like, he was right. I whether I want to admit it at the time or not, but if I had listened to him sooner, I would have had more happiness and time spent doing things that I probably are more important, to be honest. And the difference between being productive and being busy is, I'm sure, You can
Activity
relate to
over
this.
outcomes. We number 7, brother.
Exactly.
Yep.
Exactly. So that's a conscious effort. And something else that you said that I can relate to is my mother also died at 63, and she was
Really?
probably a lot like your mom. She was the most detail oriented, would wake up at 5 a.m. every day and work 3 jobs and be a mom and just, superwoman.
She's my
And
hero. Yours too,
yeah,
sounds like.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that a lot of people listening, this is really important that when you have something on your shoulder that says you can't do something, you're not good enough, or you have doubt, it's usually one person's voice. And it oftentimes can be a parent. Well, I was lucky enough that before she had passed and before she had fallen, into what happened, I had a moment to go on a road trip with her, and she
Mm,
at the end of it was like, "You know what? I'm not worried about you anymore. You've made it, no matter what happens." And that was before I started becoming an entrepreneur. Like I'm saying a couple weeks. And I don't think if I didn't have that conversation before she passed, I might not have the confidence, or definitely wouldn't have had the confidence at the
oh, yeah,
time to take the
yeah,
leap of faith. So
yeah.
I think for anyone that still has their parents, my ask for you is give them a call, because the last conversation I had with my mom before she unexpectedly passed was, "Mom, don't worry about it. You're stressing out. I'll see you tomorrow." And then tomorrow never came.
Oh,
So the reason I share that story is to say, if you can't stomach the day to day, the reality for one day, don't wait 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, because you don't know what's going to happen in between then, right? Like
so true, bud.
you said, you hit a boiling point and you made a change. I feel like some people have too high of a tolerance for pain.
Mm,
And in that type of pain, the existential pain of your life, like you got to understand when enough's enough, then listen to that signal. Because I have a close family friend. I have 3 stories. A close family friend who was an exemplary father, husband, community member, volunteer, just great guy. And he kept telling his wife that he was going to retire at 65. Well, he's 70 on his 76th birthday. That's when I'm retiring, I promise. And she died the day before his 76th birthday.
yeah,
And I share that to say, it's like, be firm with your commitments, like you said.
yeah,
Not that he was a bad guy, but he just always thought like, oh, well, still
yeah,
got it, but
yeah.
you never know. So,
Dude, thank you for sharing a story about your mother. I had a similar conversation. She said, I'm not worried about you. You and your sister, you're going to be fine. She was worried about my dad.
my mom still is worried about my dad. She has been here for years.
Well, mine passed a couple years after.
Hmm.
So she was kind of right to worry, but but they're together, that's the solace we find in it now. But it's our job, dude. It's our job. And I can sense it in you, the way you tell the story about your mother. It's our job to carry that legacy forward. Like
And that's what I want to talk about next. Is you said something, whether off camera or whatnot, about one of your proudest achievements was creating connections that outlast your tenure in any one organization. And I think for people that from the outside of corporate America looking in, they don't think that people in leadership might have that as a crown achievement, which is
Mhm.
building lasting relationships. How did you determine that that was very important core value? And can you tell any stories around the transformative nature of holding that core value?
It occurred to me many, many years ago that we talk about our boss. So I'll use it from a different perspective. There were people at home at their dinner table with their family talking about me
Hmm.
as their boss. And usually when I would have that thought, or someone would share, yeah, my wife and I were talking about blah, blah, blah last night, or I was always a little nervous to think about how that conversation went or how it would go. But what a silly reaction or thought, because guess what? I have a big say in how that conversation goes by my behavior, right?
Yeah.
So it occurred to me so long ago, because I was at the dinner table with my wife at the time, probably bad mouthing a boss of mine. And this light switch went on. It's like, well, people are doing that about you. And I don't want to paint this picture that, it was my goal to be likable, or it was my goal, to be the most popular, charismatic leader. Cause those really aren't, that's not what I'm saying. Some of the most impactful leaders I've ever been around really lack charisma,
Mm.
but they make up for it in authenticity, and they make up for it in genuine connection. So I thought, if people are going to be at home with their children and loved ones around the dinner table talking about me, I'm going to do everything I can to make that conversation one that is authentic. That doesn't mean, Kyle was super sweet to me today, or he didn't hold me accountable, or he didn't, I'm not being, counseled or coached for whatever. It doesn't mean that. It means it's always coming from a place of development, improvement. Like if you're missing a number, my first conversation isn't going to be like, Ross, what are we going to do to get that number up? My first conversation is going to be like, hey man, we pick each other up, right? And we challenge each other. and you're not performing up to the standards that we agreed to the standards that you'd be able to deliver. So let's talk about that. But it's look, we all have, if you're in a position of authority, I say that instead of being a boss or leader, because that's your choice. If you want to be which of those that you want to be. It is a hell of a lot easier to be a boss than it is to be a leader. It's a hell of a lot easier because you can just say, this is what I said. This is why I said it. I told you so. Move on. My business card says so. That's that. It takes a lot more time and energy and care, most of all, to be a leader. So I just made that decision a long time ago that I wanted to be the same person in front of a big audience as the same person I was in a one-on-one environment, and my words and actions were going to be consistent regardless of the environment. It's not easy, brother. I'm telling you, there are times when, to this day where I want to bark at someone, and occasionally I will bark at someone when it's warranted, but it's not my go-to. And I just think, look, dude, in all of our relationships, never mind work for a second. It's kind of like dancing. We want to have good rhythm. When I move right, I want you to move right. When you move left, right, I'm going to move left. When you step back, I'm going to step forward, and vice versa. And we approach every relationship outside of the workplace that way. Like we give grace when someone disappoints us, or, and in the best relationships, we challenge them when they didn't live up to their own expectations or their own standards, right? We have this back and forth. But when we enter the workplace, we've all been conditioned to just kind of accept nonsense, accept shitty behavior, accept people behave in ways that we know they wouldn't behave similarly outside of the workplace. And I just don't think that's how we get the most out of each other. I don't think that's how we grow. I don't think that's how we become excellent. And that's my goal, is for us to create cultures of excellence. We're not looking for perfection. We're not looking for utopia, but we are looking for excellence. And excellence is not going to be found in a straight path.
Well,
but
Kyle,
don't work together. We'll get there together.
I need to highlight, but whether it's the ABC or the 10 Wheeze, the litmus test on are you strengthening relationship is, do you ask yourself as the leader the question, how does this affect their dinner table? And I think if people would just do that, it would have a hell of a lot easier time communicating. That's a great, simple test. Yeah. You can't help that you're going to be brought up at the dinner table, but you can help on how everyone else, the family, which extends to the community when you're talking about big companies. You can, was Michael Jordan the most popular guy of all time? I mean, he was a great basketball player, but
he was a tyrant behind the scenes.
But if you ask Dennis Rodman and Scottie Pippen, they'll defend him, the people close to him, because they know why he did it. Tom Brady, he was a tough guy, but
Yep. And so, sometimes I get pushback on we number 8, we challenge each other, and I go to Tom Brady a lot. So when Tom Brady obviously retired, but any quarterback, when they get sacked, someone didn't do their job, most likely. Like occasionally there'll be a scheme and something happens and we can't help that. Is he not allowed or empowered to say, come on, Ross, you got to be your best, man? Likewise, if I'm throwing pick after pick, you got to be like Kyle. Like the math itself says one coach cannot conceivably get the most out of a 53-man roster in the NFL. That's why they're assistant coaches and coordinators and everywhere in between. But to outsource all of that improvement to someone else, I think is foolhardy.
I was playing football in probably junior high, and I remember getting tackled for a loss as a tailback, and I yelled at the guard. I said, "You got to block for me." You know what he didn't do the next play? Block for me. And I got tackled for a loss, even worse. And I think that was one of the earliest memories I have of, probably could diplomatically have challenged him instead of barking. I want to ask my favorite part of the show, which is leave a question, ask a question. And the question that is for you, for my last guest, makes me reinforce the belief that there are no such thing as coincidence. The question is,
I love it. Yes.
What's the most important measure for success beyond money and career?
So my immediate answer is impact, but we would all define that differently, right? And I think it changes. So my level, what I would say, what I quantified success as throughout probably the first 40 years of my life was more material in nature. It was, more quantifiably check this box type thing. And, as I've gotten older and recognized the value of those connections that we have an opportunity to make and the value that we can deliver in the role that we're in, inside of work or out, for me, it's impact. And I personally quantify that impact in a way that is unique to me. And that is, who have I helped? Who have I developed? There's a woman on our team, by the way, who makes these amazing cakes. She makes, you can't tell if it's a real thing or if it's edible, right? She's the fondant and all these things. Mm-hmm. And we have very open conversations. Like, you don't need to work here anymore, man. Like, I love what you do for us. Very valuable member of the team. but this is not, it's not where your passion is. This is where the cake is where your passion is. So what are we doing to get there? And Ross, when we have those conversations, do you think she works less hard the next day? Of course not, man. She's invested in her own growth and development because she sees someone else is as equally. So that's my personal measure for success these days is around impact. Let's don't, again, don't want to come across naive. My impact today can be quantified in certain ways, book sales, for example,
Sure.
or, appearances on stage or whatever. I don't mean to make those sound like vanity metrics, but for me, selling nearly 50,000 copies of my book has been like mind bending, but it also is a success measurement. Tell me the word is being spread.
No, I love impact, and it's how you define it.
How do you answer it?
Most important measure for success beyond money and career is freedom to me. And I define freedom as absence of external coercion or the ability to do otherwise. And I realized that when I was in my private equity career, which had a lot of fulfilling moments and I made a lot of impact in a lot of ways, during the birth of my daughter, I was getting chastised by my in labor wife and the nurses and doctors to get off my phone
Yeah.
because I was still working. I wasn't focused on what mattered the most. And then
Yeah.
since I stepped into this role and had that epiphany, I can make a pretty substantial impact for clients and people. I can get compensated fairly, better than even when I was in PE, which was a scary road. I'll tell you, but I can still pick my daughter up from school and I can still be at home when she needs me to be at home, and I
What a
can be,
privilege.
yeah. So I have the freedom to live life that I want to. And to me, that's the most successful part about my career so far.
Mm.
And I'm having fun doing it. And could I make more money doing something else? Maybe, but if I was trying to solve for that, I'm sure.
Yeah.
But I'm still working towards it
Yep.
because every day, like you said, I think the impact that you had was caring for people the way people are to be cared for, and still striving for the best potential of yourself and your team and everyone to me, that's really impact. And I think that coincides with, you get freedom as a consequence of making the right impact. So
Yeah.
what question then, Kyle, do you have for the next guest? Not knowing anything about him.
What are you doing today to all but guarantee the impact you could have today? And I think it's an important question because at this time of year, we set these resolutions like we talked about earlier, and sometimes they're, I'm going to lose 10 pounds. Well, that's not immediate. So I don't see the results of my effort tomorrow. I don't see it the day after that, right? Whatever your resolution is, there's usually kind of a longer tail on those things. So my question is, what are you doing today? What are you doing today, either towards any one of those resolutions or changes you want to make, but more broadly to have an impact? What are you doing?
Beautiful question. Last question for you, Kyle, is not nearly as deep. And that question is, how can people find you, get in touch, support the book, all the above?
Yeah. Well, first of all, Ross, thank you for having me today, man. It's been a real honor. You're doing really important work. I'm privileged to be on the show with you on your platform. And thanks for the opportunity to share where you can find me. So essentially all social media platforms, the same handle. It's at Kyle McDowell Inc. My website is also kylemcdowellinc.com. My book is Begin with We, 10 Principles for Building and Sustaining a Culture of Excellence. It's available wherever books are sold. Audiobook, Kindle, you name it. Essentially anywhere you can buy books, but it seems like Amazon's probably the cheapest and fastest way. But by the way, I share those social media handles not as a vanity thing, like for followers or likes or those things. I actually use them to engage with readers and others that either think I'm full of shit or they want to bounce a scenario off me or looking for some guidance. So I try to respond to every single one of those. So thanks for giving me the opportunity to share those.
And thank you, Kyle, for coming on. And thank you, everyone, for listening. You guys have heard me before say this, but it's still true to this day. I don't run ads in the show. I don't do this for money or for any metrics. What I do hope is if you found value, share it with a friend. That's the way the show grows. And that's how you can make an impact today. So thank you guys, everyone. And as always, be well.